All right, you guys, so this is lesson 3.1, day 2. Sorry.
Maddie Shaw, please come to the office. Maddie Shaw, please come to the office.
Just so you guys know, the homework assignment from today has a worksheet that it's asking you to work out of. So if you turn to the find the last page in your workbook. I'll look right now just so you guys don't get confused. So the last numbered page in your book is page number 131. So then if you flip to the next page, which at that point there's maybe 8 pages left. The next page says different quotients and there's 33 problems. And then if you flip it over to the next page in the front of the following page, those are actually the answers right there, okay? So the difference quotient worksheet is in the back of your workbook. Don't do it on there. Do it on that separate paper the way you're supposed to, but that's where you get the problems from, okay? Okay, so we are going to add some expressions, multiply them, subtract them, and divide them, okay? They all have different names, like right here, the names are f of x, and we've got a g of x, and we've got an h of x, okay? So question A says take your h of x and add it to your g of x, okay? So I'm just going to put an equals right here, and then I'm going to write my h of x, which is x over x minus 1, and I'm going to add it to my g of x, which is 1 over x minus 1. Now, it does ask you to simplify, which means you have to actually add those together, but the awesome thing about this problem is, you guys know in order to add fractions, you have to have a common denominator, and I already do have a common denominator, so I just write that x minus 1 at the bottom, and then the top I just add, so it's just going to be x plus 1, and that's your answer, okay? It does ask you to find the domain. So remember from the previous lesson, do you have a fraction with an x on the bottom? Yes, you do. So the restriction is x cannot be equal to 1. Remember, x minus 1 can't be 0, which means x can't be a 1. And it didn't say how to write the answer to the domain, and so that is totally sufficient. Let's do a little d colon in front of it so that the person reading it understands that that's actually the domain. Okay? Okay, question B. Take g of x and multiply it by h of x. Okay? So put an equals right here. Write down your g of x, which is 1 over x minus 1. Multiply it by your h of x, which is x over x minus 1. Again, they're asking you to simplify. So when you multiply fractions, you guys, you have a over b multiplied by c over d. So the tops just get multiplied together, that's a times c, and the bottoms get multiplied together, that's b times d. So back to this problem, you just go 1 times x is x, and then x minus 1 times x minus 1, you could write that out side by side. You could also write it as x minus 1 squared, but then it's not fully simplified because you can't have parentheses in your answer. So I'm going to go ahead and go through and I'm going to FOIL that. So when you do that, x times x is x squared. X times negative 1 is negative x. Negative 1 times x is negative x. A negative x and a negative x is a negative 2x. And then a negative 1 times a negative 1 is a positive 1. Okay, so that's your answer. Now, to find the domain, do you have a fraction with an x on the bottom? Yes. So the denominator, which is x squared minus 2x plus 1, cannot be 0. Okay. Now, to figure out the restrictions, you have to factor. But I don't really have to even think about factoring because prior to factoring, it was x minus 1 times x minus 1. So I know that's what that would factor to. So those can't be 0. So x minus 1 can't be 0, which means x can't be 1. So it actually has the same domain restriction as the previous problem. Okay? Okay, question C. Take f of x and divide it by g of x. Okay, so put an equals right here. Write down your f of x, which is x squared minus 4, and divide it by your g of x, which is 1 over x minus 1. Okay, now these get a little bit ugly. Okay, so you just have to stay calm. You guys, this is your f of x, the x squared minus 1, and it's divided by g of x. So this division symbol that was in the beginning, I call that my main division bar, and I just make it really long. Okay, now you already have a fraction over a fraction. It's not like the top has two separate fractions that you need to add together, nor does the bottom. X squared minus 4 is a fraction. It's just x squared minus 4 over 1. So if you wanted to, you could write it like that. You can see now that you really have a fraction over a fraction. So I'm going to take this division bar and turn it into a division symbol. So it would be x squared minus 4 over 1 divided by 1 over x minus 1. And then remember the rule of division. You leave the first fraction the same, and you flip the second one upside down so that it would look like that. And then you multiply the tops, and then you multiply the bottoms. So on the bottom, 1 times 1 is 1. I'm only going to have a 1 there. When I multiply the tops, I'm going to have to FOIL those. So I'm going to get x to the third minus x to the second minus 4x plus 4, and that's my answer. Okay, now finding the domain on this is just a little bit tricky. It looks like when you look at the answer, the domain is everything, right? But when you find the domain, you guys, you have to actually look throughout the whole problem, anything that was ever in the denominator. So I'm going to highlight every single denominator in the whole problem. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. I'm just trying to show you, like all those things I just highlighted in green, none of those can be 0 because they were all at some point on the bottom. Okay, so even though that green x minus 1 is not on the bottom in the answer, it was still on the bottom somewhere, so it's still a restriction. X minus 1 can't be 0, so x cannot be 1 is still a restriction on this problem. Okay, question D. Take your g of x, which is 1 over x minus 1, and divide it by your h of x, which is x over x minus 1. Now I want to show you one thing that people do. They start making these fraction bars like all the same length. So then they start getting like super confused, like what's divided by what. So this original fraction bar is here, and I want you to make it longer because that's the guy we're going to turn into the division symbol. Okay, so now we're going to write this as 1 over x minus 1 divided by x over x minus 1. Now I'm going to flip the second one upside down. So you leave the first fraction, make this a multiplication, flip it upside down. Okay, now I have exactly an x minus 1 on the top and exactly an x minus 1 on the bottom, and so those can cancel, and you actually must cancel those. Okay, some people think that the answer to this question is x. It is not x. The x is on the bottom, so it's actually 1 over x. Okay, now let's talk about the domain. So if you look at the answer, you can tell that x cannot be 0, right? That's a restriction. But again, and you know, I'm not saying necessarily I would highlight these if I were you. I'm just kind of showing you everything that I just highlighted in green was at some point in the denominator, so there are all restrictions. And so yes, x equals 0 is a restriction, but so is x equals 1. Now, you can just go 0, comma, 1 like that. They used to be kind of picky about that notation, but I asked them specifically and they said that's fine. So there's your domain. Okay. All right. Question E. Question E is to take your h of x and divide it by your f of x. Okay. So h of x is x over x minus 1. Big long division bar right there. And then f of x goes on the bottom, which is x squared minus 4. Okay, now I know it's kind of picky, but this equal sign is actually supposed to be right there. So I'm just going to kind of clean that up. And I do have a fraction over a fraction. So I can put a 1 right there and show that. So you have x over x minus 1 divided by x squared minus 4 over 1. Then change your division to a multiplication. So it's x over x minus 1 multiplied by 1 over x squared minus 4. Okay, and now to simplify this, I just multiply across. I'm just going to like draw a dividing line right here and continue up here. 1 times x is x on the top. On the bottom, if I FOIL that out, I get x to the third minus x to the second minus 4x plus 4, and that's my answer. Okay. If you had the bottom in a different order, the denominator, that would be fine. I'm going to make that nice and long. When I find the domain, that big thing in the denominator in the answer, I'm not going to even like set that equal to 0 because I knew prior to that it was x minus 1 times x squared plus 4. So as long as I include those in the restriction, then I found all the restrictions of this x to the third minus x to the second minus 4x plus 1. Okay, so just watch. Denominator, 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 denominator. I don't have to include that because just right before that, it was those two things. Okay, so I'll just include those and I'm good. That's what I was trying to say a second ago. X minus 1 gives you restriction of 1. X squared minus 4, x squared minus 4, you guys, if that can't be 0, then x squared can't be 4 if you pull it over. And then when you square root it, x can't be plus or minus 2. So I'm going to come over here.
Hello!
Get out of here, lady. I'm teaching. Get out of here. She's such a pain. Okay, there is your domain. And you're done. Okay, question F. Take f of x, which is, sorry, I have to keep scrolling, x squared minus 4. And add it to h of x, which is x over x minus 1. Okay, let's put a 1 underneath it. This is just a little bit more difficult. So in order to, I'm going to separate those out. In order to add those, I have to have a common denominator, which I do not have. If I were to get a common denominator, it would be x minus 1. Okay, now this guy,
Boom, shakalaka, boom, shakalaka.
Would you get out of here? I'm busy. Oh, what would you do without friends, right? Okay, so this guy right here, it's just a 1. So some people think that you could do like an x here or something, or maybe like a negative x to try to get it to a negative x or an x minus 1. That's false. Basically what you say is, what would I multiply by 1 to get x minus 1? That would be x minus 1. So if I multiply the top by x minus 1, I would also have to multiply, or if I do the bottom, I'd also have to do the top. So on the left fraction, what I have to do right here is I have to multiply, sorry, I didn't mean to scribble that. I have to multiply these two things together. So I have to FOIL. So when I distribute, I get x to the third minus x to the second minus x plus 1. I said when I distribute, I actually meant when I multiply. This second fraction right here, which is in green, already has the x minus 1. So I don't have to do anything to that. And I'm just going to write down the numerator, which is the top, which was an x. And now I'm just going to clean up the top, and I get x to the third minus x to the second. This minus x and plus x go away. So you have a plus 1 over x minus 1. So there's your answer right there. Okay. Now as far as the domain, the denominator and the answer restriction is x can't be 1. If you look here, guys, I'll do it in purple on this one because I already did green. If you look at all these denominators, They're all the same. I already listed that restriction, so I don't have to add anything to it. Here are your answers right here. I know I kind of went crazy with the highlighting, sorry. There's your answer and there's your domain, okay? All right, believe it or not, that kind of ugly little fraction stuff that we just ran into is actually much easier than how I've done it in the past. If you do struggle with fractions, which I know a lot of people do, if you go on Canvas, whenever I say go on Canvas, I'm talking about go on Davis School District Canvas. So you'll never go on Weber State Canvas. So if you go on Canvas on the first week of school, like even before you came to school, there's a link right there for a fraction review video. It's only like 15 to 19 minutes long, I think. And it's actually like a really great review of fractions because you are going to have to do quite a bit of fractions in here. So if you're interested, you can watch that, okay? Okay, question 2. Given this function that has a domain that x can't be 1. Well, that makes sense because here's your denominator, set it equal, x can't be 1, right? And you've got another function right here, and the domain of that is x must be greater than or equal to -4. Well, that makes sense as well because remember restriction 2 on domain restrictions says if you have an even root on the top, that must be greater than or equal to 0. X is greater than or equal to -4, and that's what they said, right? Well, they're never going to tell us a wrong restriction, so they gave them to us, but we could have figured it out anyway. Find the domain of f minus g of x. Write your answer in both set and interval. Okay, so I'm just going to be honest with you. First of all, this is an important problem. It showed up on the midterm and or the final, and I actually kind of messed up last year on this. So I just want to be really careful that I do this well for you. So they didn't ask you to find f minus g of x. But what I want to do is I just want to set it up so we can look at it, okay? So basically you take your f of x, which is 2x over x minus 1, and you subtract your g of x, which is the square root of x plus 4. Okay, now I'm not going to make you like actually do that, but I want you to look at that and say, okay, what is the domain? Okay, step number 1, or restriction 1, do I have a fraction with an x on the bottom? Yes, it's right here, okay, this stuff right here. So that tells me that x cannot be 1. Let's look at restriction 2. Do I have an even root on the top of a fraction? Yes, I do. So I know x plus 4 must be greater than or equal to 0. So x must be greater than or equal to 4. Okay. And then I don't have an even root on the bottom. So what I told my students last year is you always just take this guy and squish them together in 1. This should be a -4, by the way. Squish them together in 1, which actually does not always, it's not always true. Okay. So here's the perfect example right here of what I messed up on last year, okay? So this guy, I'm just going to graph it, and you don't have to graph it when you do this, but graph it right now just so that you understand. So both of these things have to be true, guys. X can't be 1, and x must be greater than a -4, okay? Greater than or equal to. So let's do the -4 business. So greater than or equal to -4, that would be a closed circle. And greater than means anything to the right, okay? But now x cannot be 1. So if I come over here and I put in a 1 like that, since it's a restriction, it's going to be an open circle like that, okay? So I need to erase the highlighting that's underneath that 1 because it is not really part of it. So here's what your answer would look like graphically, okay? So they want it in set and in interval, okay? So in set notation, it's going to be x such that, okay? Let's do it this way. So it's between a -4 and a 1. So we're going to go -4 is less than x is less than 1. but the -4 has an equal sign, so we're going to put an equal sign right there, okay? And then we're going to put the word or, okay? Because a number can't be in this region and in this region, so it's this or that. And then it's bigger than 1, so that would be x is greater than 1, close it off, and there you go, okay? In interval notation, it would look like this. -4 with a bracket to 1 with a parenthesis, union 1 with a parenthesis to infinity, okay? And that's it. So those are your two answers, okay? So just kind of look at it, maybe graph it might help you, and then put it in those two forms, okay? Okay, let's do example 3. Here's your f of x. There's the domain. The domain is always going to be right that they give you. X has to be greater than -3. Here's your g of x. There's your domain. X must be less than 4. Find the domain of the function f minus g of x, okay? Hey, by the way, guys, I just want to go over one thing really fast. I feel like I need to do it a little better. So if you look at this right here, if we were asked to find the domain of g of x, which we are not, but I'm just trying to show you, that would be restriction 2, which means the inside, -x plus 4, must be greater than or equal to 0. Okay, so just watch what happens. So you bring your 4 over, -x is greater than -4. And now what I'm doing is I'm dividing by a negative. So when I divide by a negative, the inequality flips the other direction. And then a negative over negative gives you a +4. So just make sure that you know that if you multiply or divide by a negative, you have to reverse the inequality, okay? That was just a little touch on that. So find the domain of f minus g of x, okay? So you go, here's my f of x, and here is my g of x, okay? Now, honestly, guys, you don't even have to do that. Here's what you have to do. You have to say, okay, I'm going to graph that on a number line, and I'm going to graph that on a number line, and it has to satisfy both of those requirements, okay? So x has to be greater than a -3, so it's going to be -3 over here, and I don't have an equal sign, so it's going to be opened, and it's going to shade over to the right, okay? And then x has to be less than 4, so I'm going to be over here at a 4. It could be equal to, so it's going to be closed, and it has to be less than 4, so it's over here, okay? Now, it has to satisfy both of those things. So what I'm doing is I'm looking for the double shaded region. So the correct answer, the place that it's actually double shaded, is right in between those numbers. So it would be like that, okay? So in interval form, it would be a -3 with a parenthesis to 4 with a bracket. And in set notation, it would be x such that -3 is less than x, is less than or equal to 4, close it off, and that's it. Okay? Now, there's a pretty good chance that this is going to be on your midterm and or your final. So just a quick summary on 2 and 3. Read the question, take that domain restriction, take that domain restriction, graph them on the same number line. Both of those, you have to satisfy both of those requirements. So on that problem, x had to be greater than -3 and less than or equal to 4. Find my double shaded region. There's my answer. Okay? All right, example 4. Here's your f of x, here's your g of x. Find the following things. Okay? Well, the first thing I need you to know is this right here, f plus g of 3, means find f of 3 and then add it to g of 3. Okay? If you want to, you can just put it all in one line. Okay? So here's your f of x right here, and you're going to put in a 3. So my advice is, even though that 3 doesn't have to be in parentheses, you could go 3 squared plus 1. If you don't really know when you have to put the parentheses and when you don't, guys, just put them, because we're just going to stick it in our calculator anyway, and so it doesn't matter, okay? And then I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to put a 3 right there. I'm going to put a plus in between. So I'm going to go plus 2 times 3 plus 1. Okay, and now I'm going to grab my calculator and I'm going to put it in just the way I see it. Okay, you guys, if you don't have that correct calculator, then you're not going to be able to use it by the time we take quiz 1, which is Thursday or Friday of next week. So get that done because I don't want you to be sad. Okay, parenthesis 3, close it, x squared, plus 1, plus 2, parenthesis 3, close it, plus 1, hit enter. Your answer is 17, and you're done. You literally don't have to show any more work than that, but you do have to show what's there, okay? Okay, let's do the next one. If they're right next to each other, or like this, you guys, f dot g of -2, that means multiply. Okay, now I'm going to go off on a little tangent over here, and I want you to really listen. What if you have an open circle? That does not mean multiply, okay? We have not done this yet, and we're not going to do it for quite a while. So an open circle means this. I'm going to tell you what it means, and then I'm telling you don't do it yet, okay? This right here means take your g of x, which is here, plug it in wherever you see an x in your f of x equation, okay? I'm not even going to do it. I'm not even going to go there. I'm just telling you a closed circle means multiply. An open circle means plug them into each other. We have not done that, and so don't do that. Don't confuse those, okay? All right, so let's do this. Find f of -2 and multiply it by g of -2. Okay, go into your f of x. In parentheses, put a -2. So go -2 in parentheses squared plus 1. Now, what I would do is I would put brackets around that. The reason I would put brackets is because I'm multiplying to begin with, and I've already got parentheses in my problem. So brackets are just another way of like saying parentheses, but just stronger and differentiating from the other parentheses that we have there. Okay, then right next to it, I could put a dot. I don't need to put a dot. And then I'm going to go g of -2. So it's 2 times -2 plus 1, close your bracket. So it just means this multiplied by this. Now, when I put this in my calculator, wherever I see those brackets, I'm just going to do parentheses. Okay? Okay, so everybody go parentheses, parentheses. -2, close it, x squared plus 1, close it. Parentheses, 2, parentheses, -2, close it, plus 1, close it, hit enter, and you get -15. And that's totally, completely sufficient. Okay? All right, question 5. Given the table below, evaluate the following. This is a new problem. This is why I'm having to re-record right now. I'm teaching to a classroom of no one except for Leedy, who keeps coming in and bugging us on purpose. This is a new problem. It showed up on something, so I needed to add it in. So let's look at A. This means take f of -4 and add it to g of -4. Okay, the -4 is an x value. So guys, here's where I'm looking for that particular problem. So if this means if x is a -4, which is here, what is your f of x? Well, that's a -2. And then I'm going to add it to, when x is a -4, what's g of x? 1. A -2 plus 1 is a -1, and I'm done. Okay, next one. This means take f of 0 and subtract g of 0. So I'm not looking here anymore. Now I'm looking here where x is a 0. So if x is a 0, f of x is 6 minus, if x is 0, g of x is a -3. Minus a -3 means plus 3. 6 plus 3 is 9, and I'm done. This one right here. F of -2 plus g of -2. So I'm not looking there anymore. Now I'm looking here, because that's where the x's are -2. So if x is a -2, f of x would be 2. If x is a -2, then g of x is negative 1. Plus a negative 1 just means minus 1. 2 minus 1 is a 1. Okay? Now, this line right here, this top line on all those guys, you don't have to write that down, but the second line, I would expect you to write it down. Okay, so let's skip that step that I said it's okay. Okay, so the next one, now your x value is a negative 4, so we're looking here. You take your f of x, which is a negative 2, and you multiply it by your g of x, which is a 1. A negative 2 times 1 is a negative 2, and you're done. That's enough work. But if you don't have negative 2 times 1 right there, I'm not going to give you credit. Here's another thing I just wanted to clarify, just really exaggerate to you. That right here and that right here are exactly the same thing. Dot, no dot, right next to each other. That means multiply. Okay? Question E, f of negative 5. So you go right here where x is a negative 5. F of x is negative 4. What would be your g of x? 2. Now, you can't leave it like that. You have to divide it out. You get a negative 2 and you're done. Okay? Question 6. Evaluate the following. Okay, so I did not, or at least I can't see where I've clarified which graph is which. That's a problem. So we're going to say the green one is f of x, and the blue one up here, the parabola, is your g of x, okay? And it bugs me because I'm just a little bit picky, so add arrows because those keep going, okay? So this one right here, this means find f of 0 and add it to g of 0. Remember that the 0 is an x value. So guys, look, if x is a 0, we're here, right? Anywhere along that vertical line. So here's one graph where it touches a 0. Here's the other one. The f of x is the green one. So f of 0 is 0. And I'm adding it to g of 0, which is down there, which is a negative 2. Don't ever do that, plus or minus. That is just like bad because you're going to get confused. So plus or minus just means minus. 0 minus 2 is a negative 2, and you're done. Okay, this one means find f of 2 and multiply it by g of 2. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of these dots because that was for the last one. So now I'm going to go to an x value of 2. That's to the right 2. So I'm using this point and this point. Okay, f of x is the green one. What is y when x is 2 on that green graph? Well, it's down 2. So that would be negative 2. On the parabola, which is g of x, if x is 2, what's your y? That would be a 2. And I'm multiplying those together. I get a negative 4, and I'm done. And I do want a little bit of work on there, okay? Now I'm looking at an x value of negative 1. So I'm going to come over here, go to the left one. There's where your f of x is, and there's where your g of x is, okay? So find f of negative 1. That's your green one, and that is 1. If x is a negative 1, you're right here, which is a y value of 1. In case it's confusing, that's just negative 1, 1. This one right here, negative 1, negative 1. So f of negative 1 is 1, and g of negative 1 is right there. It is minus 1. Now look at this. You're subtracting a negative 1. Minus a negative 1 is a plus 1, and that's a 2. If that's confusing, watch. Just do this. F of negative 1 minus g of negative 1. That is the same as that. What's f of negative 1? 1. Minus, what's g of negative 1? Negative 1 minus a negative 1. So plus 1, you get the same thing. Okay? All right, the last thing that I'm going to show you, I know this is long. Can you imagine the last lesson and this lesson I used to put together in one? It was crazy. It was like so long and bad. So anyway, I was just scanning how much we have left. So anyway, this is the last concept, but it is a pretty big concept. It is very likely to be on at least the midterm, if not both the midterm and the final. Okay, and people struggle with it. So I need you to listen really closely, okay? So let's get this down, okay? The reason people miss this, like 100% period, no question, is that they don't know what these things stand for, okay? So look what we're going to do. First, we're going to do this. Then we're going to do this. And then we're going to do this, okay? So I want you to draw an arrow right there. And I want you to write this down. What does that mean? F of x plus h. It means plug in parentheses x plus h in for x into f of x. So listen what I'm talking about. Here's your f of x. Right here, you see an x. Wherever you see an x, you're going to put x plus h. So that first step would be 2 times x plus h plus 1. I just took my f of x, where I saw an x, I replaced it with x plus h. That's all that means. I think most of you are like, totally get that. This one's even easier. This means change the signs of f of x. You're just taking a negative and distribute it. Now, I don't want you to just immediately change the signs. There's a question that could come up on the final. I think I have it down below in these notes where it says, what is a correct first step? Well, if you've already distributed the negative through, then that problem is going to confuse you. So long story short, just put a negative and then put your f of x like that. And then that's all over h. That's the third step, and there's nothing even to explain because it's just divided by h. Now I want you to freeze right there. Okay, don't write anything for a second. This guy means go into f of x, wherever you see an x, put in x plus h. That's what I did right here, this part right there. This negative, put it there, then put your f of x, and then divide by h. Stick an equals in front of it. Follow your equals down. The bottom stays in h. Distribute the top, and you have 2x plus 2h plus 1 minus 2x minus 1. The next step would be, h is on the bottom. Now look how sweet. You've got a 2x and a negative 2x. I'm just cleaning this up. Those cancel. The 1 and the negative 1 cancel out. So I have a 2h. Okay. Now the top is a monomial and the bottom is a monomial. One term and one term. So since that's the case and I have an h on the top and an h on the bottom, I can actually cancel those out. So my answer is 2 and I'm done. And you have to show all that work. Okay, let's do another one. So I'm going to write the little formula right here. And we're going to do it nice and slowly. And this is going to be on your midterm, I'm sure. This right here. This is the number one reason people miss this. They don't know what these mean. So f of x plus h means go right here and here and here. Where you see an x, replace it with x plus h. So you go parenthesis, x plus h in parentheses squared. That x got replaced with x plus h. Then go plus 2 times x, which is going to get replaced with x plus h. Finish the equation, or finish the right-hand side, minus 1. Minus f of x. What does that mean? It's so easy, guys. Look, it means put a negative, and then in parentheses, put your f of x. And then the last thing is all over h. Now, look what we're going to do. We're going to simplify and simplify and simplify and simplify, and we're just going to keep writing that h down. And then at the very end, if everything has an h, you can cancel out the h's. And if everything doesn't have an h, then the h just stays and nothing can be canceled. Okay? All right, so what do I do now? Well, this x plus h squared, didn't mean to scribble, that x plus h squared means take x plus h and multiply it by x plus h, which is FOILing. So I'm going to do that. When I FOIL that, I get x to the second plus hx plus hx, which gives me 2hx. H times h is h squared. Okay? I'm also going to do some more things. I'm going to distribute that 2. I get 2x plus 2h. Guys, see this minus 1? Don't forget about him. He's part of the equation, so you have to include that in that first part. Take your negative and distribute it. Every sign changes, not just the front one. So this plus 2x becomes a minus. This minus 1 becomes a positive. Okay, now let's clean it up. So look what happens, you guys. This x squared cancels with this x squared. This 2x cancels with this 2x. And this 1 cancels with this 1. So what I have left on the top is 2hx plus h squared plus 2h. Okay, when I set this up, I did too many fractions. I can get rid of those because now look what happens. This guy has an h, this guy has an h, this guy has an h, and this guy has an h. Everybody has an h. So the only way I can cancel is if everybody has an h, and they do. So now I'm just going to take one h out of all 4 of those terms. So my final answer is 2x plus h plus 2. There's no more h on the bottom because I had to take an h out of all of them, and that's your answer. Okay? All right, let's do another one nice and slowly. Now we've got a fraction. And again, I'm going to write the equation right here. Weber State will give you the equation. So don't worry about memorizing that. Do you see how this is g of x and this says f of x? Who cares? So just make those g's. Doesn't matter. Okay? So find g of x plus h. Now this is going to be kind of tough, so just hang tight. Just like stay calm. Okay? So this is 1 over x, which is now x plus h. Okay? Minus that g of x, which is 1 over x, and the whole thing is over h. Okay? Now, this is why you might want to watch this fraction video that I have on Canvas. Because now I do not write this as a division symbol yet. The reason is because I don't have a common denominator on the top. I'm trying to add these two together right here, and I can't do it right now because I don't have a common denominator. Okay, so let's just put the h on the bottom. And to get a common denominator, so easy, guys, you just squish those together. So it's x times x plus h. So now this guy right here has the x plus h, but he's missing the x. So I'd have to multiply the bottom by x, therefore I have to do the top. 1 times x is x, okay? In this one, I've got the x, I'm missing the x plus h. So I'd have to multiply the bottom by x plus h, therefore I have to multiply the top by x plus h. Distribute that negative, and you get negative x minus h. Okay? Now, clean up the top fraction. Look what happens. This x and that negative x are going to cancel out. Okay? Now, I'm going to flip this thing. I'm going to write it as a division. Okay? So everybody write this as negative h over x times x plus h. Big long division bar is a division symbol, and then you have an h. Okay? Put a 1 underneath it. Same thing that we did just a little bit ago. So leave the first fraction the way it is. Change it to a multiplication. Flip it upside down. I'm out of room, so I'm going to go like that and start back up at the top. Okay? Now look how sweet. This h is free. When I say free, it's not added or subtracted to anything. And it's on the top. This h is also free. It's not added or subtracted to anything, and it's on the bottom. So if you're multiplying and you've got the same thing on the top as the bottom, those actually will just cancel away. So your answer is negative 1 over. Now I don't want to write it as x times x plus h because that's not simplified. So I'm going to write it as x to the second plus hx, and that's my answer. Okay? I just want to say one thing really fast, just to make sure you guys understand something. Look right here. If you have x over x plus 3, totally separate from the problem I just did, can this x on the top cancel with this x on the bottom? The answer is no. The reason why is this. There are 3 people in this picture. They're all best friends. Here's a person, here's a person, here's a person. If this person right here and this person right here go to the movies and they don't even call that person to see if they can go, that is so rude. So you can't do that. These people can't go to the movies without this person. You can't cancel those x's unless everybody has an x, okay? Now what if it looked like this? X over x to the second plus 3x. Look, you guys, here's a best friend, here's a best friend, here's a best friend. All 3 best friends. Everybody has to be included, nobody's excluded. Does everybody have an x? Yes. Can everybody go to the movies? Yes. So I'm going to take an x out of everyone. So this guy, if I take out an x, what's left? That's a 1. On the bottom, if I take out an x, what's left? Just 1x. Right here, if I take out an x, what's left? A 3, and that would be how to simplify that. So make sure you know that, okay? All right, question D and E. It's getting kind of long, and I'm so sorry. Good thing you're home in the comfort of your own home. All right, let's go back to D. Find the difference question, okay? So here's your equation, f of x plus h minus f of x divided by h. So go right here, and where you see an x, put in x plus h. So it's 1 over 2 times x plus h minus 3. Then you subtract f of x, which is 1 over 2x minus 3, and the whole thing is over h, okay? Now this one's pretty messy, but you're smart. You can deal with it, so you'll be fine. Okay, just put your h on the bottom. Let's simplify this guy right here, this denominator, okay? So it's going to be 1 over 2x plus 2h minus 3, like that. And then minus 1 over 2x minus 3. Okay, common denominator on the top. Just push those together. So it's 2x plus 2h minus 3 multiplied by 2x minus 3. Now I just have to figure out what's on the top. Here's my main division bar, so don't get confused. Okay, now look at this fraction. Okay, you've got the 2x plus 2h minus 3. You're missing the 2x minus 3. So 1 times 2x minus 3 is 2x minus 3. This guy, you have the 2x minus 3. You've got that. You're missing the 2x plus 2h minus 3. Here's where people mess up, right here. See this negative? I mean, this stuff is tough, you know? And the reason, truly, one of the biggest reasons people miss this is distributing that negative. So when you distribute that negative, it changes all those signs. So it's a negative 2x, a negative 2h, and a plus 3. Okay? Now, I'm going to clean this up right here before I start flipping things around and making them divide. I'm going to simplify. Look at the top here. 2x minus 2x cancel. Negative 3 plus 3 cancel. So it actually ended up like not as horrible as we thought, right? So now what I have is negative 2h over 2x plus 2h minus 3 multiplied by 2x minus 3, make that division bar really long, then make it a division symbol divided by h over 1. This h right here divided by h, I made it in h over 1. Now I'm going to flip the second guy upside down. I'm going to make it a multiplication. Okay, now this h here is free and this h here is free, so those can cancel. And I'm going to write it as negative 2 over. Now, I am not going to make you multiply that out. I really do not think Weber would make you multiply that out. So if it's like super ugly like that, just leave it. If it's a midterm and it's ugly and it says simplify, you probably better multiply them together, but we won't right now. Okay? All right, question E. Evaluate the difference quotient. You must set up rationalizing the numerator. Okay, so this is a little bit tough too. So look, f of x plus h minus f of x divided by h. So it's tough, but it's not as tough as it used to be. Okay, so f of x plus h means go here, right here where you see an x, put in x plus h. So you go the square root of x plus h plus 3. Subtract f of x, which means it's actually an h of x. Who cares? Subtract the function, which is x plus 3, and then the whole thing is over h. Okay, so that is your setup. Write that down. That is setting it up. Now, Weber State used to make us do this terrible stuff to this. They don't make us do it anymore. One thing they do make us do is they make us set up rationalizing the numerator. What does rationalizing the numerator mean? It means look at the top, and you can't have any roots up there. Those square roots have to go away. We're not actually going to get rid of them. We're going to set up what we would do if we were getting rid of them. Okay? It's super easy. So look what you do. Since that's a binomial, put parentheses around it. What you're going to do is you're going to multiply the top and the bottom by the same thing, which is exactly that numerator, but the conjugate. So the sign is different. So it's going to look like this. You guys look. X plus h plus 3. Do you see how that's a minus? Put a plus, and then do the x squared of x plus 3. Now, if you multiply it by the top, you have to multiply the exact same thing by the bottom, and that's your answer. Literally, that is your answer. I know that's crazy. They give it to you as a multiple choice question. This has been on the midterm and or the final as well. Okay? Okay, let's do another one. You're going to really, it's just going to click for you. I know it is. Okay, here we go. Evaluate it. Okay, so I just like for you to see this when I do it. Okay, so there's your equation. Okay, so go right there. Wherever you see an x, put in x plus h. So it's the square root of x plus h minus 4. Minus that f of x, which is an h of x. Who cares? So it's the square root of x minus 4, and then that's all over h. That's your first step. Now, if you were rationalizing the numerator, you must put parentheses here, and then you're going to multiply the top and the bottom by the same thing, which is exactly that with the middle sign changed. So it's the square root of x plus h minus 4 plus the square root of x minus 4, and the top and the bottom of those things will always match. You're multiplying the top and the bottom by the same thing. That's your answer. That's all you do. Okay? Okay, example 8, and then we're done. And this was long, and I'm sorry. Okay, the difference quotient for a function is this. What is a valid first step to simplify the quotient? Okay, so there are a lot of possible answers to this, and this is actually a multiple choice question, which is probably good. Okay, so you don't have to do the difference quotient. They did it. They're just saying, how do you simplify it? Well, you know how to do that. We just did it a minute ago. Okay, so if that were your difference quotient, one thing you could do is you could FOIL that guy out. So, and you could drop those brackets. So when you do that, when you FOIL that, if you go x to the second, hx, and then another hx is a 2hx, and then h times h is h squared. Then I'm going to distribute the 4. So it's going to give me 4x plus 4h. And then don't forget your plus 2. The negative, I'm going to distribute. So it's a negative x to the second minus 4x minus 2 all over h. Okay, now that was a lot of simplifying in one. So what you have to do is you have to look at those options, and even though maybe they didn't simplify all those things in exactly, you know, like if they didn't do all that simplifying, but they did a part of it, like maybe the whole thing is the same, but they just took that guy and turned it into that, well, that would be correct. What if they just left that whole thing and they just distributed that negative? Well, that would be correct as well. So you have to look through it at which one is the correct option. If I remember correctly, it was just one option was the correct option. Okay? Okay, so that's it. I know that was long. I know it was kind of tough. You guys are awesome. You can do it. So here's your homework, just a clarification. So it's page 220, those problems. And then this right here is what I was talking about. So difference quotient worksheet, where's that? That's in the back of your workbook, which is what you're taking notes in right now. So turn to the last numbered page. There's still about 8 pages left. One is the difference quotient worksheet on the back of it, and the next page are the answers, okay? Do just those problems, and then page 150, page 272, problems listed. Then here's some more. So you have to do this right here. You have to do 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D using this table, and then you have to do 2 and 3, okay? So that's it. Okay, have a great day. Thanks for watching, you guys.